This is the story of how a critical misstep led to an Alaskan fisherman being chased and torn apart by a hungry black bear, turning a casual fishing tour into a living nightmare. Hit that like button and subscribe right now. This is the terrifying black bear attack on Frank Barnes. Welcome to Final Affliction. It was October 6th, 1942, a sunny autumn afternoon along the Stalk River near the Canada-Alaska border. 33-year-old Frank Barnes and his 4 friends had flown in for a tour of the vast Alaskan iceland before the freezing winter set in. The Stalk River began in northwestern Canada, ending in the small Alaskan town of Wrangell. It was an opportunity to catch species like the Chinook salmon and other small fish. The area was covered with thick forest which remained frozen for most of the year. The terrain was exceptionally rugged, and small peaks littered both sides of the 150-mile-long border. Summer warmth and clear sunshine was a rarity only seen for a few short months, before the cold winter froze the trees and lakes once again. The 5 tourists, including Frank Barnes, had settled in a camp just 27 miles up the Stalk River for only a few days, but hoped to make the most of it. The area hosted an interesting mix of wildlife, from mammals typical of the temperate rainforest like moose, deer, elk, and sheep, to the occasional Arctic polar bears that would descend from up north looking for fish in the fresh flowing water to the south. But the most striking and formidable predators of the area were the black bears and the grizzly bears that populated these mountainous glaciers. Black bears are ferocious animals weighing up to 600 pounds and standing close to the height of an average human. Their razor-sharp teeth, including 4 front canines, can grow up to 3 inches in length and tear apart pieces of flesh from its prey in a single bite. The area had witnessed bear attacks before, and the travel brochures were replete with warnings about the danger of bears and what to do if tourists encountered them. The first 2 days of the trip were filled with joy as the friends laughed and delighted at the plentiful fish they were able to catch. Unbeknownst to them, a predator lurked among the trees in the distance, with its gaze set firm on the men who were oblivious to the danger they had just walked into. These October days were the last before the harsh winter froze the river solid, and the hungry black bear was not happy seeing humans claim its marine prey. On the 3rd day, everything looked usual in the cold Alaskan morning. Frank Barnes was ecstatic with his catch and had loaded up his camp's cold storage with dozens of fish. A few hours went by, but no one anticipated that things were about to take a turn for the worse. Frank Barnes shouted to the men that they better head back to the camp. It was several minutes away by foot, and he did not want to take chances among the dense forests in the dark. Another member of the trip, Graver Foster, wanted to stay for longer, but relented after Frank insisted and promised they'd come back earlier the next morning. The men started loading up their backpacks and picked up their supplies to head back to the camp. A disagreement emerged between the men when Frank Barnes wanted to take a detour and explore a much shorter path to the camp. The thick forest trees were a confusing maze, and he thought they could discover an easier way to their camp for their fishing trips in the next few days. But the men were not on board with the idea and just wanted to go home and relax. Frank finally decided to split up from the rest of the group and treaded alone into the trees, equipped with a map, compass, and his rifle. He was too preoccupied looking for a shorter path to contemplate the fatally naive decision he had just made. With a bag full of dead fish, he walked alone in the forest, thinking he was only a few minutes away from their camp. He was a novice with the rifle he carried, but its presence inspired an unwarranted confidence in him for his safety. He staggered forward, stomping on the dense ground cover of bush and fallen willows. The sunlight had dimmed, and only a few minutes into his trek, Frank felt an uneasy sensation that he was being followed. He looked back, loading his rifle in anxiety. Frank then noticed a glowing pair of eyes among the trees to his left and could make out a large mass of black fur in the distance. His spine tingled as a wave of terror took over him. Frozen still and unsure of what to do, he started slowly backing up in hopes that the black bear would ignore the man and move on. But his optimism was short-lived, as the bear locked its eyes on him and matched his pace. Frank realized he was a target for the bear, and there was no escape on either side. In terror, he made the greatest mistake of his life in that moment. He screamed and started running. Frank was locked in a chase with the giant black bear and was hopelessly incapable of outrunning it. The jungle was the bear's turf, and Frank's legs, shivering from terror, could not carry him to safety fast enough. His friends were not far away in the forest and heard his cries for help. They frantically started calling his name and following the direction of his screams. For a few feet, Frank stumbled ahead as fast as he could as the bear roared behind him. He had no time to look back or take proper aim with his shotgun and fired a few frantic missed shots. The forest floor was littered with trees and bush, frozen and slippery from the cold. The bear finally caught on to him. It lunged at Frank from behind, stomping its two front legs on his torso and collapsing him to the ground. Frank's fate was sealed as the bear scratched his stomach with its razor-sharp claws, opening up his skin and exposing his vitals. Frank was in excruciating pain. His gun had fallen away as he lay beneath a massive predator trying to fight for his life. The bear then took aim for his head, biting the side of his neck with its 3-inch-long canines deep into his nerves and arteries. He lay paralyzed for a few short minutes among the bush as the bear tore away pieces of his flesh. This was when the team finally found the bear devouring Frank Barnes alive. They fired a few shots at it, trying to scare it away. The black bear disappeared into the trees, buying the men just enough time to carry his blood-sodden body to safety. He was unresponsive, but his vital signs were still intact, giving the men slight hope for his survival. He had to be pulled from a net of willow branches and thick bush, making the rescue all the more difficult in his frail condition. The men got back to the camp and took him downstream to Wrangell City's small hospital for the most immediate care he needed. The doctors had stopped the rapid bleeding and tucked his exposed intestines back inside before wrapping his wound shut. It was a gory sight that made the magnitude of the attack clear. Authorities had been alerted by this time, and all fishermen and campers had been immediately called back. Frank had lost too much blood and needed to get to a bigger hospital quick. He was flown to Portland, Oregon in his fragile state, but the hopes of his survival or recovering were fleeting. He had not regained consciousness despite efforts of the medical workers, and the massive amount of blood loss had put his life in dire straits. His family and friends had been called by this time, made aware that these may be his final moments. At the hospital in Portland, Frank's body finally succumbed to his injuries, and he breathed his last breath in the hospital bed he laid in. His vital organs had been infected beyond recovery, especially after the amount of blood he lost. The event made headlines around the country and revived fears of bear attacks for anyone with plans to visit Alaska. For Frank Barnes' family, the casual fishing trip brought back the horrifying news of their son's tragic demise. Frank's parents had to see him in a mangled state, with a disfigured face and broken neck after a vicious mauling by the hungry forest predator. The traumatic images scarred them for life, and they wished their son would have gained consciousness once just to see them beside him before his inevitable, final affliction.